So today we'll be taking a deep dive look into P5's protagonist Joker and how his year-long ordeal highlights certain issues within the Japanese criminal justice system. Hey guys, I'm Lady and I love doing analyses on the Persona games, so if that's your thing, you've come to the right place. Anyway, if you're worried about P5R spoilers in this video, don't be. Anything unique to Royal will be delegated only to the final section, which will be timestamped. So with that said, let's dive right in. Alright, so first off, it's important to note that Persona 5's premise is unique in that it distinctly focuses on societal issues that are prevalent in Japan. Sure, there will always be some degree of understanding and relatability across cultures, but it can't be overstated just how different Japanese cultural values are from those of the wider Western world. For example, Japan and wider Asia's collectivist values place emphasis on group cohesion over the self, while the individualistic values of the West favor the freedom of the individual over the collective. This means that sticking to the natural societal order of things is extra important in collectivist Japan. If you want to know more about why it's so important to grasp these cultural differences when it comes to P5, then check out the video in the cards above. So why do I care so much about these things, you ask? Well, I am of Japanese descent, so this research is like connecting to my own heritage. Plus, I'll also be graduating with a degree in social work soon, so all this sociological, psychological, and cultural stuff is super interesting to me. But anyway, moving on, let's do a brief overview of the wildcard protag of P5. We see that Joker takes the harsh reality of literally having his entire life uprooted in stride, and continues to stand up for the little guy, even at great risk to himself. Throughout the entire game, he keeps the same integrity he first demonstrated when he saved that woman from Shido, by fighting the injustices that his friends and confidants encounter head-on. But speaking of Joker's wrongful conviction thanks to Shido, we'll now take a look at why the teen is shunned so terribly by society in the aftermath. Within the first hour of the game, we're already shown just how much of a rude awakening is in store for Joker, quite literally, as he moves to Tokyo. The sheer number of people in the city is overwhelming for someone used to the country, but worst of all, he's treated with hostility by his caretaker right from the start. Sojiro even knows that Joker was convicted on false charges, but says Joker should have just kept his head down, that he shouldn't have tried to help that woman, since the cost was the protag's entire societal reputation and future prospects. You see, because of collectivist and Confucianist values working together in tandem in Japan, the result is a society that places great emphasis on duty and obligation. This is especially true when it comes to honor and how a single family member's actions can ruin an entire family's reputation. Just think about Disney's Mulan and how one mustn't bring dishonor to the family. In this context, it makes sense for both Joker and his family that he starts anew somewhere else during his probation, since societal shame would have followed their entire family around much more blatantly if he stuck around. This shame is different from most Western cultures that are based on guilt, which can be absolved through confession, self-righteousness, and other actions based around the individual. Shame, on the other hand, though, can never be removed unless a person does what society expects them to. If you don't live up to the expected obligations of your family and society, that shame will stick around as long as these people think negatively of you. I think the sheer scope of this can be a difficult concept to grasp for some who are coming from a Western perspective, and I wouldn't fault anyone who found the reactions of Joker's classmates an over-exaggeration at the start of the game. But the harsh reality is that this societal shunning is an all-too-real phenomenon in many Asian cultures. We see this in practice once Joker arrives at Shujin for the first time, even though he was technically supposed to start with a clean slate there. Thanks to Kamoshida's leaks, everyone knows of the protag's criminal record and avoid him like the plague. All anyone can talk about is how he must be such a terrible person and how he's tarnishing the entire reputation of their elite college prep school. Being blamed for this is definitely saying something, since academics is king in Japan. But on another note, I appreciate how P5 uses Joker's new reality to its advantage when it comes to changing up the social link / confidant types we've typically seen in P3 and P4. Since none of the Shujin students want to associate with a criminal, Joker has to find his non-Phantom Thief connections outside of school. But speaking of Joker's wrongful conviction, it's time to move on and discuss how exactly this was allowed to happen within Japan's criminal justice system. So you know how within the first 20-ish minutes of the game, give or take, we are shown Joker's brutal interrogation scene? What if I said that a well-informed Japanese citizen would recognize that as the first example of blatant social commentary in P5? That before we're even 30 minutes into a 100+ hour game, we're already introduced to a troublesome aspect of real-world modern Japan. And that's the abuse of power afforded to the criminal justice system. There's a reason the conviction rate rests at 99.3% after all. In fact, you could say that despite the claim that suspects are innocent until proven guilty, it's the opposite that is essentially practiced. Just one example of this happened to Aoki Keiko, one of Japan's most infamous cases of wrongful convictions. She and her husband were given a life sentence for the supposed murder of their daughter and spent 20 years behind bars before finally being acquitted and released in 2016. So how in the world is this kind of thing possible? Well, in a short documentary, Aoki-san details her harrowing interrogation, one where she was treated as guilty right from the get-go. They never listened to a word she said and constantly shouted accusations that she was responsible for her daughter's death. Independent investigations later on actually revealed that a fire accidentally ignited on its own in the family's garage. Keiko, her husband, and their son escaped the home, but their daughter Megumi was trapped and tragically died. But during the initial interrogation, prosecutors took advantage of Keiko's guilt that resulted from her inability to save her daughter. She was also still in shock, understandably, after the horrific fire, yet she was cruelly interrogated for 12 hours straight while in this confused state. She was also never permitted to see a lawyer this entire time, so it was only a matter of time before she finally broke down and signed the false confession as was dictated by the police. Others like her have also falsely confessed just to get the interrogation to end. You see, in Japan, any suspect can be held for 23 days without charge, can be denied a lawyer in the interrogation room, as ruled in a 2013 decision by the Justice Ministry, and the authorities are not required to record their questioning on camera. It's also common for the police and prosecutors to take shifts and work together during interrogation. So, as you can see, this gives them plenty of time to mentally break down the suspect without any repercussions. Kinda like what went down for a large portion of Saya's Palace arc. A former prosecutor of 13 years, Hiroshi Ishikawa, said in an interview that he would berate his subjects for hours, calling them stupid and shouting profanities at them. His fellow prosecutors do the same thing, and his boss even bragged about kicking a suspect's shins under the table. Suddenly, this scene seems all too real, doesn't it? Even the very way in which you name your character in-game directly highlights this key failing of the Japanese criminal justice system, and that is its over-reliance on obtaining forced confessions to use in court. A tremendous amount of weight is placed on confessions as evidence in Japan, which is unlike the court systems in the United States and UK, where establishing the necessary facts of the case, or aka the who, what, where, and when, are sufficient evidence for the jury to make their decision. However, since a defendant's verdict is ultimately decided by the judge in Japanese courts, this changes the way in which Japanese prosecutors present any particular criminal case. The small essay titled "Why Confession is King in Japan" explains that Japanese judges demand to know why, or aka the motive of the suspect, on top of other necessary evidence. This demand requires prosecutors to really get inside their subject's head, and leads to the awful truth that the only way to obtain proof of any such motive is by obtaining a signed confession. It's normally seen as a failure on the prosecutor's part if they're unable to procure one, which is why they will stop at essentially nothing to get it, even if the result is sending an innocent person to jail. So clearly Saya isn't alone in this. Since the conviction rate is over 99% after all, no prosecutor wants to be the only one who fails to win a case. In comparison, courts in the UK, Canada, and the US have reported conviction rates in the 70 and 80% range in recent years. So think about what this means for defense attorneys in Japan. They can go their entire careers with only a handful of wins, if they're lucky. This reality really adds some weight to Saya's goal of becoming a defense attorney in the end, and truly shows how ballsy Joker is throughout the entire game. He's already faced the injustices of the Japanese hostage justice system, as it's sometimes referred to, once already, and yet he's still willing to go out of his way to help others. Though Joker is a silent protagonist, as is typical for the Persona franchise, he has a much more established personality compared to his predecessors. Two traits stand out in particular, and those are his defiance and strong sense of justice. Clearly, he refused to back down from a drunk Shido the night of the arrest. Or, in other words, he still fearlessly got involved in a situation between two adults in a society where respecting one's elders and superiors is of major societal importance. But, as we know, he got falsely convicted of assault, which then forces him to adopt a meek persona and hide his too intense gaze behind glasses to avoid any more trouble during probation. The metaverse is where he can freely show off his true self though, as is demonstrated upon his and Ryuji's very first, unplanned, trip to the metaverse. He defiantly returns Kamoshida's gaze, which understandably pisses the teacher off. You see, returning eye contact in such a direct fashion, especially with someone of a higher social standing, is considered rude in Japan, yet Joker still does it anyway. He's quite flashy in the metaverse in general, a trait that'd be considered deviant from typical Japanese society that happens to value humility. But most importantly, he never strays from his strong sense of justice and continues to defy the corrupt authority figures throughout the game. Even though Joker has already faced enzai before, which is the Japanese word for false accusations and rigged verdicts, by the way, he continues to get involved in cases that would end his probation early, and not in a good way. I really like to think that because of his experience with being falsely convicted, Joker understands, likely more so than anyone in the cast, that people can't be taken at face value. This perspective is part of what helps him empathize with the plight of others and makes him such an adept wildcard. But besides the well-developed, defiant, and justice-pursuing Joker, Royal fleshes the protag out just a little bit more in the third semester. The third semester of Royal establishes a part of Joker that is not explored in the main story otherwise, and that has to do with what his own personal wishes are. I mean, to even get the true ending as intended by the P5R devs, Joker must make more personalized decisions during the year. For example, completing Akechi and Maruki's confidants, or basically forming a camaraderie with them, is what comes to mind. Here in Maruki's reality, Akechi is still alive and has no criminal record to answer for. But while Joker may be happier in this constructed world, accepting Maruki's offer would be the ultimate betrayal of the lesson learned when facing Yaldabaoth earlier. And that's not allowing anyone or God to control the people's cognition. And so, Joker sticks to his guns and defies Maruki's reality, choosing instead to face life in the true reality head-on. And that's a wrap. Thanks for watching, and please leave a like if you liked this video. I still have other P5R sociocultural videos coming for the other party members, so remember to vote in the polls on my community tab for who's up next. Subscribe for more, and until next time guys, take care. See ya!